Next we're going to talk about fish identification. There's several methods of identifying fish. First off would be a dichotomous key, and second, a book with pictures and descriptions. Often the best method is to combine the two and use one book that has really good pictures and identifying descriptions, and then another book that has a good dichotomous key in it. The level of identification is very important. The closer to species level that you can identify, the more information you're going to have. It's also more difficult to identify to species level, so even if you can identify to the order level, you'll have some information, but the closer you can get to species, the more information you'll be able to generate from that. A few suggestions about using a dichotomous key. You should always start from the beginning. Don't think that you can just leap into the middle of a key and go from there. Always start at the beginning, read both of your options, look up any words that you don't know, follow carefully, get really familiar with the key that you're using. They all work a little bit differently, so get familiar with one, find one that you like, and try to stick to it if you can. You'll have a lot less frustration that way. If you've not used a dichotomous key before, typically you'll start in one spot, you'll have two options to work with. You choose the one that fits the most, and then from there you'll go to two more options, and keep reading each one closely and following the directions, and you'll normally get to what you're looking for. Some common fish families in Ohio, really going to identify down to families in this introduction. I would typically identify fish to the species level. Macroinvertebrates we're identifying to the family level. Fish we're going to species, but for this introduction I'm just going to go to the family level. Some common families include the minnows, the catfish, suckers, sunfish and black bass, lamprey, musky pike and pickerel, and the perch, walleye, and darters. We'll start out with the minnows. Minnows are typically a small fish. Most people think that minnows are a very small fish. What people don't realize is that goldfish and even carp, which get very large, are all in the minnow family. Some identifying characteristics of the minnows are soft rayed fins. They don't have spines in their fins. The goldfish and carp are an exception. They'll have one spine in their dorsal fin, but for the most part the fins are soft rayed. They may have tubercles on their head when they're in breeding conditions. These will look anything from like salt sprinkled on their head to some of the creek chubs will actually have large horns on their head during breeding. They also all have forked tails. Catfish, most people who don't know anything about fish can identify a catfish. They have whiskers on the front. These do not sting you. Most people think that the whiskers can actually sting you. This is basically the fish's tongue. Catfish live on the bottom, as you can tell by the placement of their mouth. Their mouths are usually down the bottom of the fish. They live on the bottom, and they use their tentacles to help find things that are in the mud and suck them up and eat them. Catfish have very sharp spines. You want to be very careful when you're handling a catfish. The pectoral fins, as well as the dorsal fin, contain very sharp spines, and in the mad toms, which is a small group of very small catfish, they do actually have a venom gland associated with those spines. So be careful when handling catfish. Catfish can range in size from some of the mad toms that are only a few inches to the big flatheads and blue catfish that can weigh 100 pounds. The adipose fin is another good identifying feature of catfish. This is a small fin that's located between the dorsal fin and the caudal or tail fin. Suckers can look very similar to minnows. However, they'll usually have a downturned mouth that actually projects. You can actually push on the top of this snout and their mouth will project downward. They are another bottom feeder, as you can tell by the placement of the mouth. They do not have any spiny rays in their fins. Their pectoral fins usually are spread out. They live on the bottom of the water, typically in fast current. These fins actually help hold them down in the water. As the water flows over these fins, it helps to hold the fish down in a high current. The sunfish and black bass, another group of fish that people are usually very familiar with. This includes your bluegill and your largemouth, common pond fish, as well as a lot of other fish more commonly found in streams. The smallmouth bass, long-eared sunfish, green sunfish, crappie, these are all in the family with the sunfish and the black bass. These guys do have spines. Most people know that the hard way. They've grabbed onto a sunfish to get them off their hook and they'll get spines in their hands. It's a method of protection for the fish. Largemouth bass really like to eat other fish, so the spines on a large bluegill will protect them from other predatory fish. The dorsal fin is a double dorsal fin. This first part of the dorsal is a spiny dorsal, and the rear portion of the dorsal are only soft rays. But this double dorsal is not separated. It's all one continuous fin. In the largemouth bass, it almost looks like a separate fin, but it's still connected by a thin membrane between the rays. Most of the sunfish will have 3 spines in the anal fin. The rock bass have 5, but all of the other ones have 3 spines in the anal fin, and this double dorsal fin with a spiny first dorsal and a soft second dorsal. Lampreys are a very prehistoric fish. They do not have a jaw. You can see on this trout they have a jaw, a bottom jaw and a top jaw. The lamprey has a disc-shaped sucker mouth. Most of the lampreys that we see in our streams are brook lamprey. They're a non-parasitic lamprey. They do not have teeth. They do not do this. There are parasitic lampreys in Ohio, primarily in the lakes. But most of the lampreys that we see around here are the brook lamprey. They don't have teeth. They live in the sand and they eat detritus. They are a filter feeder. Very, very cool fish. They spawn on a gravelly substrate in the springtime. They'll come up into small tributaries, lots of them all at once, and they spawn and then they'll return to the larger stream. And the juveniles will bury themselves in the sand and feed. Muskie pike and pickerel all look very similar. They have this duckbill mouth that's filled with very sharp teeth. They have their dorsal fin is set very far back in line with their anal fin. Most fish, the dorsal fin would be around the center of the body. The muskie pike and pickerel, their dorsal fin is all the way in the back in line with the anal fin. This duckbill mouth is very prominent in this family. These guys can range anywhere from the little grass pickerel that we have around here to the muskie and pike that are a very big sport fish. Perch, walleye, and darters. Most people know what perch and walleye are. The darters are a little less known, but very, very common. Darters are in the same family as the perch, walleye, saugeye, sauger. They both have 2 dorsal fins, like the sunfish had a double dorsal fin, but the sunfish were connected. The perch and walleye, their dorsal fins are totally separate. They have a spiny dorsal in the front and a soft dorsal in the back. Even in these little tiny darters, they'll have one spiny dorsal and one soft dorsal. Some of the darters we have around here are really, really colorful fish. Others are more drab and blend in with the substrate. Typically they live on the bottom of the stream. Like the suckers, they use their fins to help hold them down in the water. They're a bottom feeder. They eat things that are under the rocks, usually good water quality indicators because they need well oxygenated water and macroinvertebrates to eat. So the fish we already covered are the really common species that we see all the time. Some of the not so common fish, but ones that do still appear in Ohio. The paddlefish, there are still some paddlefish in the Ohio River, a very large filter feeder. Sturgeon, there's still some sturgeon up in the lake. These are very prehistoric fish. All of these are pretty prehistoric fish. The sturgeon have armored plates instead of scales. They have these very large bone-like plates. Bowfin is a fish that we do get pretty commonly around here. They live in sluggish water. They have this very long eel-like dorsal fin, and they have a hard bony plate on their throat called a gular plate. They're a predatory fish, very large teeth, very strong fish. The eels, not very common around here, but they do exist in Ohio, mostly towards the lake. Trout and salmon, again, these are only going to be found in your cold water streams. And the gar. We do have gar pretty commonly around here, another predatory fish. They also have plate-like scales that fit together. They're not overlapping scales like most of our fish have. These are more plated scales. This is the conclusion of the fish ID.